we always, when you see on content online where people are like, stop eating avocado toast, and it's like, you can buy a house in London, and it's almost like off. But what you pointed out was, when we're talking about £9 a week, it is like that.
2% a year, which sounds nothing, created a 15-year difference. That power of compounding really makes a huge difference.
Lisa Conway-Hughes is a financial advisor, Mensa member, and friend of the podcast. What are the small changes you can make that could make a big difference to your financial future? The one thing this year, I think that's the thing.
It's boring, but good financial planning is doing the right things regularly. So these little things that you can do really, really add up.
So we're going to talk today about small changes. I actually think they get a bit of a bad reputation, small changes, a bit of an eye roll. I think when people approach their finances, they want big actions. But what we're going to do today is talk about small changes that will make a meaningful difference. And I want to start by putting some numbers on it. So you had a look at Fidelity's, is it called the small changes calculator?
The power of small amounts.
Okay, yeah. And it looked at, what increasing your pension contributions by 1% does, right? So can we go through some of these numbers?
Yeah, so I did 3 different ones, a 25-year-old, a 35 and a 45-year-old. So if a 25-year-old was on 28,000 a year and they did just 1% extra, which is going to cost them £6 a week, which I think is quite an achievable amount for most, to cut back on, 72,000 extra in retirement, which that £6 a week translates into a huge number. And then 35-year-olds on a £45,000 salary would give them an extra 58,000 a year. And again, that's only costing you £9 a week to go in. And if you're 45, I put on 100,000 salary. So at that top end, still going to give you 59,000 extra as a lump sum, and that costs you £20 a week. So even if you're earning a lot, you might think, God, that 1% is actually going to be a lot. It's £20 out of your pocket.
And it's not really out of your pocket because in many cases it's coming pre-tax, right? So
exactly.
If you run it through the taxation, the £9 might only end up as 6 or 5 in your pocket.
Exactly.
Do you know what assumptions they were making in terms of growth?
Yeah, so they're not wild. It's 5% a year growth every year, and that your salary increases by 3.5% a year.
Are people's salaries increasing by 3.5% a year?
I think there's been a pretty broad stagnation of incomes over the last 10 to 20 years. We've seen a big rise in pay in the last few years to compensate for inflation, but it hasn't really it hasn't really got people back to where they are. I think most people will kind of scoff at the idea that you get 3.5 every year. But I do think long-term incomes tend to track inflation. Otherwise, people just get pushed into the floor.
And also promotions are going to get you into that next bracket over your lifetime.
It's big jumps, isn't it, in pay?
Yeah.
What tends to happen is you earn a level and then you take a big step up through a promotion, a pay rise. So it's not 3.5% a year is not going to be 3.5% a year. It's going to be, I coast for 10 and then I jump up 20% or whatever. Yeah. The growth thing is interesting at 5% because I know the calculator says it doesn't accommodate for inflation, but 5% is the inflation-adjusted growth rate of the global stock market for the last 100 years, I think. Because I think it gets about 8 nominal.
So you're not beating inflation then with this?
Well, 5% would give you a figure that does accommodate for... So, because if the growth rate of the stock market is 8% and inflation is about 3%, you would get 5% real. So I think it's probably quite fair.
Yeah, I don't think it's mad. I don't think it's like when you see these crazy numbers and the growth rate is 8% or anything like that.
When you forecast pensions, what does the regulator say you have to do there? 20%. Do what you want.
I'm really cautious, so I use a modelling tool, and I always do inflation 3%, investments 4%.
Oh, so you're only doing 1%.
That's very
growth.
conservative.
Well, because I don't want ever to look a client in the eye when they get to retirement and the money plan's not worked. It's much better to celebrate there being more.
So you get them to their plan with a 1% real growth rate, and
I try to.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah. That's
so
amazing.
You're like the best salesperson ever, like under promise and overachieve. You're like, you'll get 1%. Oh, you got 5. Well done.
I think clients think I have this personality disorder because pre-retirement I'm really mean and telling them always to do more, and it's never enough. And then after retirement, they're like, what? And I'm telling them to spend lots. So they have to get used to the new me in retirement.
So, I mean, can we acknowledge, though, that for some people, the pushback will be that even 1% is not affordable. You know,
Well, then do 0.5%. Do a £5 a month, whatever you can do. Because I tend to when I increase my pension, I always do it to an amount that scares me, and then I find that I adjust my lifestyle around it, cut back on those things that I could often do without. But if things are really tough, then you just do what you can manage.
I definitely feel like, for me personally, it's like we're discussing whether we should go to send our kid to nursery school or not because it's so expensive.
Yeah.
And like, is it worth it? Should my partner go back to work or all these things? So 1% for, I know like me and a lot of my friends this year, we've been like, damn, everything's so expensive. So like 1% feels like a lot, but in other times it doesn't feel like a lot. So
and also
feels like
don't
cycles.
forget, in that stage of your life, pensions can be your secret tool depending on your earnings, because doing pension contributions can reduce your salary down below that 60,000 mark, for example, and allow you to get then the full child benefit. Or if you're earning over 100,000, for those lucky ones, you can use pensions as a tool to get below the 100,000 mark so that you're getting more contribution from the government to your nursery fees.
So how would that work? Would people is that essentially people put money into their pension as soon as they get paid?
Yeah, so say I'm earning 65,000, I want to pay 5,000 a year extra gross into my pension. So my real earnings are 60,000, and then that allows me to get the child benefit.
Yeah, because the tax traps that exist, so past 100k, the marginal rate shoots up to like 10,000% if you've got 3 kids or something, because you lose all of the child-related benefits and incentives. So nursery can cost an arm and a leg. So yeah, and a small action is if you're in one of those tax traps, they move the one.
Yeah, it used to be 50 to 60,000, and now it's 60 to 80,000.
So if you're at, say, 62k, you could pay an extra 2k into your pension, and you might even be better off because
I think child benefit works out $2,500 for the first kid, so you'd actually be better off in your pocket by putting that 2,000.
It tapers, does it, between 60 and 80? But it's worth.
So I'm wrong there. You won't quite be better off, but long term you will be.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I'm doing a talk at a company on Wednesday. And we're just talking about, getting the most out of your pension and stuff. And the employer matches 5%.
Yeah.
So, if they do the bog standard of 4 and 3 and all that, but if you put in 5, they'll put in 5. 90% of staff don't go to that.
Crazy.
So that 1%, again, like you're saying, if there's an extra match, it doubles again. So the 70 grand that you're talking about would be 150 potentially in retirement.
Yeah.
I think my main aim is to go in there and just beat them over the head and say, just bring it up by 1% because it's.
Yeah, I did an article for a newspaper a few weeks back, and we looked at the company pension scheme, and there were 3 types of pensions. Everyone just went into the default, and all 3 of the journalists whose pensions I analysed, not a single one had read page 2 or page 3. So they didn't realise that by putting in that little bit more, the company would actually double what they put in. So just by putting an extra 1, they were going to get an extra 6.
Wow.
And by switching. So you've got to just read or ask your company to explain to you the way the pension works and if there are different types, the benefits of each.
Do you find that companies aren't forthcoming with that information then? Or is it?
I think they assume you'll read the handbook.
Because it's a big benefit, right?
Yeah, it's very important. And also I think companies have a responsibility to get it right, for their staff, but also for you're investing a lot of your own money, the company's money into the pension. I think employee education is really, really important because some people just dismiss it, but actually it can be a huge benefit and a big attractor of the right type of talent as well.
I'm seeing a big shift now with people online that are basically saying, when I go for a job, I'm asking them, what pension provider do you have? Who is the default? Because if it's X, I don't want to work here because their fund choices and fees are horrible. And why? What's the match contribution? And I think,
I think that's brilliant.
Yeah, because it is money.
And it will make people change. It will make employers change if they're in a pension scheme that's not doing so well or is just a bit lazy and things could be done a bit better. Then I think it will make change. So the more people that ask that, the better.
Yeah, because if you actually think about it, if you've got a job offer, one's 45k, one's 50k, but the 45 does 6% for every one you put in, they're paying you more money.
Yeah.
You can get to a point where they pay you lots more than the 50.
Exactly.
Do you think over time this is going to get more kind of honed and more people will know about it? Because obviously like this auto-enrollment was quite fairly new.
I mean, it's been going a while, but in the grand
like,
scheme
yeah.
of things, yeah.
So over time, do you think companies will be a bit more transparent?
2012. I think it was 2012. The auto enrollment was brought in. I don't know.
That's fairly new.
Yeah. I think the downside to auto enrollment is people think, well, that's that box ticked. I'm doing what I should.
Yeah.
But I read, in the back of the Sunday Times, they do a sort of my life in numbers kind of thing. And there was the guy who's head of Phoenix Life now. And he was saying that he thinks that figure needs to be actually more like 15, 16%.
Well, it was all the apathy it's created is kind of damaging. And I was reading something from DWP at the time when they launched it, and they basically said that the 8% match contribution, which is the bog standard, plus state pension will get someone the minimum level of living standards as set out by the PLSA. So basically, you are existing. You've got no room for manoeuvre. You're basically poor, and they then said people will need to pay more or do more, but then they just stopped, and they don't really publicise that information. So I think a lot of people think 8% has been created by policymakers, so it must be enough. I'm fine, I'll just coast on that. They don't have that conversation of, no, this is just to kind of get you the minimum.
Don't forget those policymakers are on defined benefit pension schemes. And people think that a defined benefit pension scheme is worth at least 20%. So they're saying 8% for us, but their pension is much, much better. So maybe we should follow what they're doing with their own money.
Not to get too political, but in the recent budget, I think I noticed that the inheritance tax rules also don't apply to defined benefit schemes. Is that correct?
Well, they die with you.
Okay, do they? So is that why,
it can go to my spouse.
I wanted to ask you this.
It can go to your spouse, but then it dies after that.
Okay, yeah, so that's why there's not the rule there. Because I was thinking, have they just screwed everyone with a DC pension and the DB ones?
Always keep your eyes open.
Yeah, because it's funny that, like you say, they're all the guys with the DB ones. Okay, so I do just want to touch on that point again. We know that for some people it is hard, and 1% might not be possible. So I'd like to look at other ways that you can have a small change that doesn't involve more money. And we've kind of talked around it there, but the default fund point, I think, is an important one.
Yeah, it's really important, because it's luck of the draw which pension default fund you're in. And if that's you're getting the difference between, this is a very good example. So last week I did a cash flow model for a client, and at a 6% return, he had enough money till 100 for his lifestyle needs. And as I was saying earlier, I always do it at 4%. So then I changed it to 4%, and then the cut-off for when he'd run out of money was 85. So that's 2% a year, which sounds nothing, created a 15-year difference. This guy's in his late 30s, so that power of compounding really makes a huge difference.
Yeah, so Nest recently changed their fund lineup. The Sharia fund, which is the one with the Islamic preferences, was the only 100% equity fund that they offered. So they've got 6 funds. And they've made it so that it's 30% bonds and something called Sukuk, which is like Islamic bonds. And I looked at this because I criticised them basically saying you don't offer 100% equity. So many people use that fund for that, not because they're Muslim. And I back-tested what the difference would be. It was 70-30 versus 100% equity. It's about 1.8% difference based on 100 years.
Well, there you go. That's a 15-year difference in retirement.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, it was so 300 quid a month for, the average rate of return, if you were 20, so long, 46 years, it was coming out at like 3.4 million. But at the 70-30, it was coming out at 1.8. So it was costing like 2 million quid. Because they just tweaked the fund. And many people in that fund won't know that change. They don't know what that means. They don't understand that when they say we want to make it less risky, what they actually mean is we're we're sacrificing returns potentially to reduce volatility, because we don't think that people like a wild ride.
No. Well, they're assuming for us, so that's why we've got to take control ourselves, I think.
There's nothing in business as important as trust. To be honest, my whole business is about trust. And that's why, if you're running a business, proving trust through your security programs like GDPR is as important as it gets. Vanta helps centralize program requirements and automate evidence collection for frameworks like SOC 2, ISO 27001 and more. So you save time and money and build customer trust. Plus with Vanta, you get continuous visibility into the state of your controls. Join more than 8,000 global companies like Flow Health, Synthesia, and Alaka Bank, who trust Vanta to manage risk and prove security in real time. This is the new way to handle risk, governance, and compliance. And you can get $1,000 off Vanta when you visit vanta.com/makingmoney. There's a link in the description for you. Do you have any advice for people that may be in a default fund of how they look at that fund and make a critical assessment of, is this good?
Yeah.
And then how they then go, okay, what fund is better?
So it's sort of a 3 or 4 step process. So you want to look at the fund on something like TrustNet, and then there'll be a graph that comes up. There'll be 2 lines, one's you, one's the average. And there's sort of the benchmark that's been given. And often that benchmark isn't a great benchmark to compare it to. So on that sheet, I'm going to look at the costs. So I want to compare the costs versus what are all the other costs of funds that I could be in. And then I want to look at returns. So if I go down then to the bottom of the page, there's a pie chart. And in that pie chart, if I added up the amount of equities, let's say it was 40% equities in the fund, I'd compare that against the Vanguard Life Strategy 40%. If there were 60% funds, I'd compare it against the 60, 80 against the 80 and so forth. If you're a bit between, you can just estimate the difference between the two. And that's going to give you an idea of what has the market done, which is the Vanguard, versus what you've done. And if you look at a Vanguard fund, let's say it's costing you 0.2% for the fund alone, your work pension, what's it costing you? Has it under or overperformed? I think that's a really good acid test to see how you're doing.
You think the benchmarks they use might be a bit not amazing. It's why I have tea here. Use my benchmark, makes me look great.
The cheek of
Good morning, mate. Welcome to the party.
Yeah, I do because, so often I see that the one benchmark that's chosen is pension specialist, and I don't even really know what that benchmark means. And I don't know how those benchmarks get put on.
Rather than going, here's a gold standard fund, like a Vanguard fund, which most people would say is low cost and tracks the market very well. So it's a fair representation of the stock market. So if they've got a fund, you mentioned life strategy funds, if they've got a 60-40 fund that's 60% equities, 40% bonds, it achieves that mix well. They're picking some other thing to track, and maybe that's because it's a bit more flattering. Yeah,
maybe. I don't know what the motivations are, but I think you just need to look behind that against the first impression that you see. And if the fund is more expensive and performing better, you want to do a price adjusted return so you can see after all the costs and charges, how would I have weathered and what are the benefits of the extra costs.
And when you're like looking at these funds, does it depend on what stage of your life you're at? So if you're in your 20s, obviously it's going to be very different if you're in your 50s.
Yeah, so when you're in your 20s is probably the time when you're able to take the most amount of risk with something like your pension. As you get closer to retirement, what we usually want to do is separate them into short, medium and long. So what of that pension are you not going to spend till your 80s and 90s? With that, you can possibly afford to be a bit more higher risk. With the money that you're going to spend in your early retirement, it's probably volatility that's really important to you. And looking at, say, the alpha of a fund to see actually what the fund manager's adding.
Yeah, I think one way that I think people should look at the default funds is, so 90% of people in these work-based auto-enrollment schemes are in the default. And you've got, if you line up 15 million people and say you've got to create a fund that fits all of them, what kind of fund are you going to make? It's kind of like Goldilocks, isn't it? It's not going to be too hot. It's not going to be too cold. It's going to be in the middle, leaning towards colder than hotter.
Yeah.
And I think, for most people, if they actually sat down and thought, what do I want? How much risk am I comfortable with? A lot of these people will be in a stocks and shares ISA listening to this with 100% equity exposure, but then will be 70-30 in their pension because they just haven't engaged in the fund, even though that's the pot of money that has the longest time to run, so can take the most.
Yeah, and I think what's great about looking at it now is we can still just about see those COVID numbers in the graph. So we can see when it's bad, really bad, how far is it going to fall? So you can actually see the good and the bad in the graph right now.
we always, when you see on content online where people are like, stop eating avocado toast, and and it's like, you can buy a house in London, and it's almost like, piss off, it's almost insulting. But what you pointed out was, when we're talking about £9 a week, it is like that. It's not like, oh, you can get 100 grand together if you stop eating avocados. What you're saying is, find £9 extra a week, and it can add a few years to your retirement. And
or
it could
if
be
you're really nervous to do it, play that psychological game with yourself. Set up a savings account for the first 3 months and do £9 a week into it, and see if you really do miss it. And then pay it in as a lump sum and start the monthly direct debit. But on the first of every month, I always do my little sort of sanity check on my money. And yesterday, I did just up my amounts that I save into my savings, only by 20 quid here and there, just to see if it ever feels painful.
I think the scary thing for a lot of people with the pensions is, once you put it away, you can't access it again. So like you said, you can put it in the savings account, and if it works out, you can just dump it in if you don't miss it. But if, like me, your car is in the garage again, then you need to, you might need emergency funds, or if you have a medical emergency or something, you suddenly need a lot of money, you can't touch that pension. So I think for people in cost of living, it's a bit scary. I mean, I'm doing okay now, but if I put away this money, what if I need it? So
then maybe do half. I think you've got to always have your emergency fund first, and then do your pension. But I think give it a go, because you can always stop it. And I made a lady, I hope I didn't embarrass her. I felt like I embarrassed her, and I hope I didn't. I did a talk a few weeks back, and the lady was really nervous about putting her money in pensions, but she'd already told me earlier at the dinner that she was 53. And so I did actually remind her that pensions are no longer her long term, because she could touch it in 4 years. So maybe you've put pensions in that long term box, but maybe you're in your 50s. So maybe pensions are becoming that shorter to medium term accessible pot. And we saw last year in the budget that the rules are making us want to change the pensions. I imagine people are going to want to be, rather than pensions being the last thing you spend, going to need to switch that order to pensions being one of the first things you spend in retirement.
Yeah, and I hate to break it to people, but you will get old. You know, it's going to happen, and there's a much more chance of you getting old than dying young. And what you're going to do when you get there, I think people often say to me, oh, I don't like pensions because I can't touch the money. And I'm like, that's the point. That's the benefit, not the curse. That's the whole reason you put it in there. Because how many people will sit there and go, oh, if I'd only just tucked away a bit more money in my 20s or 30s or 40s, I'd be better off now. Yeah. Pension. Exactly. That's the way you do it, because you can't get out of it.
And I used the Royal London calculator to see what's the percentage chance of me dying before retirement. And it was 2%, which initially you think that's a very low number, but actually it's a bit higher than
that. That's quite high. I was thinking that's low.
Yeah, yours will come back at 19, mate. You're burning the
19.5.
You're just melting the candle.
It just made me think of my year group at school. There's probably 150 in my year. So 3 of those people aren't going to make it to retirement. So in one way that shows why life cover is needed, but it also shows why we can't just sort of live, what's it called? Live young, live hard,
die fast, whatever. Live fast, die young.
Whatever. We know what we're talking about, but we can't have that mentality. We do need the pensions and or other assets for our safety net.
Yeah, because 2 in 100, but 98 don't. So the chances are still on your side to live a bit longer. One thing that I did, the roundup features, when I was reading the notes, I've got this roundup thing that just sucks a bit of money off every time I spend, and it's just a pot of cash. And I was like, I've got that, it's about £40 a month built up in there. And I put that into the calculator, and I was like, oh, that's, tens of thousands of pounds. Do you have any other ways that people can kind of find that money in their life?
Well, if you're truly honest, are you really organised with your money? I think is the first thing, because if you're not organised, you can't really answer that question, whether you've got spare money or you don't. So I think having a plan that suits your personality, your mindset, is going to make you more efficient when it comes to money. And I think, so for me, as I've said before on previous podcasts, if I've got money in my account, I'll spend it. So mine truly has to go out the first day of the month so I can spend whatever's left. But some people, it's seeing the goal and how close you're getting towards that goal helps them squirrel away the more money every month. So yeah, I think you've got to work out what's going to motivate you and then put it in place in a sort of a system using direct debits or roundups or whatever it is, that means you can play yourself off, if that's the right way of saying it. But you can just, you can get the most out of the money that you earn. If you've got a limited company, then maybe it's about feeling quite frugal on a monthly basis with what you pay yourself. So you build up a lump sum in the business and then you whack a lump sum into the pension just before the end of your tax year. I think, yeah, there's lots of ideas, but you've got to find out the right way for you.
Yeah, I after our first ever chat, you said, you know, you push people to put a lot into their pension. And I build up cash inside of my company. And I think a lot of it was panic about it might end.
Yeah.
But now what I do is I just reset to zero every year.
Yeah.
And then it kind of puts my back against the wall again.
Yeah, makes you scared.
It makes you work, yeah. And it's so tax efficient to pay into the pension. It's really good. What kind of personalities do you think exist? Because one thing that I had in the past was I thought the fact that I blow all the money in my account was like a thing I needed to stop rather than work with, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
You know, I tried to beat that out of me.
Yeah, well, I think it's got to be about what makes you happy. So if I were to suddenly become frugal, I think like I reward myself.
You said that like you wanted to spit on the floor when you said it. You're like frugal.
How dare you?
You've got a lovely belt on, by the way. So when you came in, nice frugal belt choice.
I think it would just. I think it depends what motivates you. So my money is an incentive for me to work hard that month in the office. And so I treat myself the following month depending on what goals I did or didn't hit. And that just suits me to a T. And maybe it's a luxury of being self-employed or running your own business that you can do that. But different personality types, there's the worrier. So there's people that squirrel away so much cash and don't allow themselves to live a little. I have a lady at the moment who I think I've mentioned her before, but I feel sorry for her. She's got plenty of money, but she won't have a shower because it costs more than a bath. And so things like that, money can get people wrapped up into this negative cycle of thoughts, which I think is something that you need to disregard. But then I have people who are in complete denial and worry me because I've been trying to beat that denial out of them for, say, 5 to 10 years in their 30s, let's say. But as they get to their 40s and 50s, if I can't change their mindset into being sensible, they're not going to stand a chance of achieving their goals. Like, if you're not sensible in your 40s, you're not retiring in your 50s, are you? Unless you're in the lottery or you've suddenly got an overnight unicorn business. But yeah, so I think you've got to be realistic about what are your thoughts, so therefore what are your habits, and therefore what's going to be the outcome that you have.
I think that's I like your idea of you work for 1 month, then you reward yourself the next month. Because I think before you talked about budgeting, and it sounds great on the podcast, but I earn a certain amount 1 month and less next month, so more than next month. So I can't really budget because
this guy earns plenty of money. I pay him to be here, and he's doing all right.
So it goes up and down. But I'm like Damo as well. If I've got money in my bank, I'm going to spend it. So we went to Oktoberfest in Germany, and I had like an Oktoberfest budget, and I'm like, okay, all the money in my bank account is getting spent before I get back to England, and it all got spent before I got back to England. So for me, it's like, if you have, I think I like the idea of at the end of the year, you then take everything you've got and then you put it in the pension, because month to month, I find it really hard to budget.
But would you have money left at the end of the year if
Probably
you did that?
not.
I don't think you would.
Well,
you spend and then work.
Yeah.
You know, like you're like the opposite to Lisa. In that sense.
I do like quarterly not quarterly, random sporadic investments. So like this month I might not invest anything, next month I might not, then the month after I might put like $4,000 in.
Well, I met you invest everything that you earn from the podcast.
Yeah.
So that like fills your eyes up.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah,
he's a good friend. He knows I'm not disciplined like that. But
I mean, the way is to do that is your money in account is not your spending account. So your money in account, maybe it could be a regular savings account, maybe, and then you pay yourself out of that a fixed amount. So you feel like a salaried person, to get rid of your boom and bust mentality.
I just love the numbers going up. Like I'm addicted to the whole, I'll put a little bit more in and watching it grow. And that to me is like the best thing in life. This is like really.
Yeah, but I like liquid money. I like to be able to dip into it. If I
Oh
need
yeah,
to.
but I just like the security and kind of freedom of knowing it, and it's there, and the numbers going up, and in a way that if I stopped right now, I would be okay, and in 30 years, and I've got myself to that place really in about 6-7 years of
really
work,
good.
just through.
But I think that's what it is. It's boring, but good financial planning is doing the right things regularly. And those right things are boring. They're not anything to show off about in the pub. They're not going to get you a bestseller. It's just saving, investing, and putting money in your pension regularly, month in, month out.
It's certainly boring for the first few years.
Yeah.
But then once, when you're at a point after, say, like a decade or so where the growth on your portfolio is significant. You're thinking, I'm earning like a wage here from
exactly. It will become where your investments are earning more than you are if you do it right.
Yeah. They say putting the ball in the back of the net is the most difficult thing to do in football. So what is the most difficult thing to do in business? Well, the clue's in our name, making money. It's really hard, especially in the current economic climate in this country. So I'm happy to announce an easy way for your business to make more money if you're running a small company, including as a sole trader, and that's by using our sponsor Tide. They offer an instant access saver account where new customers can get 4.07% AER variable on unlimited deposits until at least the 31st of March 2025. If you're interested in putting your hard-earned money to work inside of your business, then head to tide.co/savings. There's a link in the description for you. For full offer T's and C's and Tide's terms, visit tide.co/terms. Variable rates are correct as of the 7th of November 2024. Yeah, and that's I think by then you'll be like, okay, let's keep throwing more petrol on the bonfire kind of thing. The way I achieve it is through paying myself first, is what I would call it, which I know is thrown around a lot. But is that something that you encourage of your clients, or?
Damn it, what is the concept of paying yourself first?
I pay you first, mate.
I like that concept.
Yeah. It's just, when you receive your money, you just carve out the bit that's for savings. And the idea is that the only money that you truly earn is what you save, because everything else is just money that you're passing on to other people, right? So for bills and things, it's like flows through your hands. So pay yourself first. When I take money out of my company or when I earn a wage, the first thing I would do is carve out my savings, rather than this idea of whatever's left at the end of the month, I'll pay myself. So yeah, is this something that you do with your clients, or is it?
I do, because the direct debits to their investments and pensions go out usually on the 1st, sometimes the 15th, but predominantly the 1st of every month.
Do you get people that come in that say, I know your client base is of a certain kind of position, but do you get people that come in and go, I can't really save, and then you put that in and then it works for them?
Everybody, regardless of what they earn, says they can't save any more than they already are. So I've actually just forked out for a new bit of open banking that fix into my client's account, where we link it to the bank account, so I actually can see
you're in
what
there.
They truly
That's
are.
funny. You're going to be like messaging them, going, "What are you doing?"
So for those who are ready to be exposed, they can do that and really learn about our money habits. And I think it's exposing when you're in that accumulation phase. And it can be exposing for lots of different reasons. But one that we saw last week, one of the first ladies to actually try it, the things that were important to her were actually the things that she wasn't spending her money on. And so then we start to change. We are going to start to change and think about where she's putting her money needs to be switched to the things that are important to her, which are holidays and seeing her family around the world.
This is what I said to you.
I was about to say this echoes Damo.
A budget isn't a restrictive tool. It's a tool to say, this is the life I want, and that's where I funnel my money. And I think people think, a budget, like, I don't want to be that restricted. Yeah. It's like, no, it's freeing. It is freeing. These are for me, it's my son, it's holidays, it's growing my business. So I can define that within the budget and then funnel the money there. Otherwise, you spend it all on takeaways and Mars bars, Well, or whatever.
And pasties.
Pasties.
Yeah, you love your
pasties.
Pasties. You love a pasty.
Yeah, I'm not anymore, mate.
But also, it's that knowledge is power, because when you get close to retirement, and you're guesstimating what you spend, that can make you feel really nervous. So many people go into retirement really scared about running out of money. They don't necessarily feel that empowered to spend. And you need to feel confident in those first 5, 10, 15 years of retirement to really spend on the things that are important to you, because you're probably not going to go on that ski holiday when you're 85. No. So you've got to do those things.
And how off the mark do you find people are when they say, this is how much I spend, and what they actually do?
25, 30%. 25,
30%. And that's the amount that they probably should save, right? You know, or, you know, be...
Well, the ideal is that you chip away then at it. And these are people, admittedly, with disposable income, and can make those shoot from the hip decisions of, I've had a bad day, let me just get a takeaway today, kind of thing. But they are things that can be cut back on.
Yeah. You might hear Toothless, the dog, drinking in the background.
Lugging away.
Yeah, thirsty dog. So yeah, sorry about that, but we are in a house, so... Okay, so 20, 25, 30%. And are they shocked when you kind of show that to them?
Yeah, because, well, a recent example is a lady that had £2,500 a month, in theory, disposable, but she's feeling really skint, stressed. She does a very, very stressful job. Her husband does a very, very stressful job. 2 kids, a nanny, private school fees. I don't think she could have been more stressed. So we have... using that knowledge that we managed to get from the open banking, are able to switch her focus. So we've almost given her a 5-year window where we're going to be a bit laxer in the short term, because what's the point in working hard to feel stressed? And we've extended her retirement by 3.5 years.
So you're saying you're going to work a little bit longer, but you're going to be chill now and live your life so that you can, and she can make that decision.
That's what a good financial plan is. Do you want more now, less later, or do you want to work a bit later? What's important for you both?
And where was the money going, the $2,500?
Fun. Ease, convenient, last minute convenience,
Uber Eats
mainly.
and things like this.
I think the most impactful episode, one of the most impactful ones, was when we looked at our budgets, our bank statements together, Damien and I, and you see how much you spend on things that you don't actually need to. So like this lady's example, for me, it was Zip cars. And since I stopped using them and now I use Lime bikes, I've saved so much money. It's ridiculous. So I think exposing like what you actually spend your money on, even if it's not with a financial advisor, if it's just with your friend or your family or yourself, it's kind of hard to do by yourself. You need someone else to keep you accountable, I think.
But
so. It makes a big difference.
Find your strictest friend.
Yeah. That's good advice. Yeah, find your strictest friend, show them your bank statement, and be like, "Do you really need all of this?"
And it will feel scary. Who wants to show anyone their bank account?
Show your dad.
Oh no, I won't be back. You're going to Nigeria to work. What is this? Why are you wasting money?
Yeah. How do people that, I mean, you know, you've got this tool that plugs into people's bank accounts and you hold them accountable. You're almost like a personal trainer for finance, right? You know, you're just whipping people in the gym. How do people who don't have that kind of assess where their money's going?
Yeah, so there's loads of apps out there that you can link open banking to. I can't think of any others off the top of my head other than Emma, but there's loads out there. And I think even on, like, I bank with Lloyds and they will show me detailed data about how I spend my money on a monthly basis. So your bank alone can do it, but you can use those apps that will give you the information.
And do you have any kind of ways that people can manage spending, you know, because we all get hit by it, don't we, where we're like, I deserve a treat. I mean, it sounds like you're pretty bad at it yourself in a way. Have you kind of got any ways to manage that?
Do you know, when I had really very little money and I had £70 to live off, that was for my food and fun and travel or whatever I was doing. But £70 was my weekly budget. I used to just literally take that out of the bank on a Monday and it would be in my wallet. Obviously, I mean, that was sadly in the early 2000s. But now there are much more modern ways you can do that. You can just set yourself a direct debit into a Revolut account and leave everything behind. You're going to have to disconnect Apple Pay and everything like that from your phone. Maybe you just have an old phone that doesn't have all the banking apps and things on it, and just live by those older fashioned principles that did work, and they worked for a reason.
Yeah, I think you spend 15 to 20% more if you have access to cards than you do. And this study was done when it was cards and money. I think Apple Pay is even more.
And let alone internet banking, not internet banking, internet shopping is just in your face, at
Amazon,
the palm of your hand.
single button click things.
It doesn't even feel like a purchase. So that when I was my most strict with my money, that worked really, really well.
Yeah, I think, again, defining the things that you want to spend money on. So when you are in those moments, you can spend it and not feel guilty, and then trying to cut all the other stuff. And having those words with yourself about, let's just wait 24 hours before I make the purchase.
Yeah.
And then you find, I didn't want that thing.
A way I find to save money, I don't have Apple Pay or Google Pay because I know I'll just tap willy-nilly. But I got rid of my overdraft because I always used to just live in my overdraft.
Yeah.
I'm like, why am I paying them just to have my balance on like minus £50 and just paying them every month? So I just disabled all auto overdraft functions, no credit cards. And I'm like, okay, at least I can't get fined on my own money. So like that saved me a lot of money over time. So it depends on your weaknesses and strengths.
If you're in your overdraft, let's say you're £1,000 overdrawn at the end of each month, that's your new zero if you're not careful, isn't it?
Exactly.
You like a tub as well, don't you? I like a tub.
What's a
you know,
tub?
you've got a jar, but like a sealed tub where you put money in.
Oh,
and then when it fills out, you deposit
pounds and notes, and then you fill it up.
I think my dad had one of those, but it was always me stealing from it.
Really? Yeah, you gotta get the sealed ones where you gotta open them. I like watching the videos online of people opening them.
It's so satisfying. You just like see all the money, and I've got a non-transparent one, so I don't know what's in there. I just keep putting notes and coins in, and then when you open it, you're like, oh, big pile of money like Scrooge McDuck. So I got my pile of money.
And I think NatWest have coin counters that are free, if I remember correctly. So you can pour it all in.
I've seen people do it in Metro. I don't know if it's
Metro
free.
Bank. I used to use Metro for that.
Yeah, I love that. I'm going to be really sad when they get rid of physical money and we're all on cards, because I do love the actual money. So what do you think some of the small steps are then that people can take this year to really improve their finances?
So switching your bank account. And I think a lot of people still have that account from, I don't know, when the mum walked them down for their first bank account, and that they've stayed with that bank for their life. And that's what the banks obviously want us to do. So to get rid of that inertia, there's the current account switching service where they'll do that hard work for you, switch all the payments, and then you can take your reward.
It's really important, this, because especially with higher interest rates, I was looking at it the other day, and the major banks, their cash ISA rates are crap. They basically rely on brand, and they go, okay, we'll pay 2% or 3%, whereas you can get these newer startups, Trading 212, Chip, these kind of neobanks or whatever you might call them, that pay like 5.2%.
Yeah, I think shopping around, being a savvy customer. I also saw one of my friends had a couple of £1,000 on a credit card that she'd always meant to keep paying off. And the interest rate was about 23,000, I worked out. But I think it was like 3 clicks of a button. She managed she could either, for a 5% initial fee, switch to a 0% interest for 24 months and clear it, or for no initial fee and an interest of 6%, she could have the new credit card. So we worked out, based on a monthly payment, she was actually better off going for 0 fee and having the 6% interest. But that was still nearly a quarter of the interest that she was paying, just by, I think it took us less than a minute to do it. Wow. And so just little things like that, especially if you've got a bit of Christmas debt hangover left.
Yeah, they rely on people basically being a bit complacent with these things, and they make millions out of it.
Especially this time of year.
Yeah. So what are you doing then too?
What changes?
Yeah.
Probably, this year, because last year was like sorting out debt, getting all my bills sorted. This year, ramp up the pension payments. I think that's going to be my goal for 2025.
Yeah, you're getting older now, aren't you?
I know it. You know what? I go to the barber obviously every time before we film, and he's like,
bald?
No, I'm not you, mate. My hair's luscious. Don't worry about my hair. Don't need any manual over here. I get him to snip out my grey hairs and my beard, and this time he took quite a while. And then I came and looked in the mirror, and I'm like, he's missed like 20, and I'm like, okay, I should probably sort out my pension now. So I'll be ramping up the payments. I feel like the mortality is reaching me finally. Yeah. I'll spring chicken forever, even though I look like one. So yeah.
Yeah. What about pensions versus, say, paying a mortgage?
Well, ideally, so first of all, is your mortgage sensible? So what I mean by sensible is, are you on the best rate you could possibly be? And are you working towards having your mortgage paid down to a certain rate by the next time that it ends? So the biggest jumps are, have you got 10% deposit, 20% deposit, and a 40% deposit? So if you can get to any of those hurdle rates before the next time you review your mortgage, you could be getting a better deal than otherwise not. But also it's about the length of your mortgage. So now we're really accustomed to these 35-year mortgages, but maybe that doesn't tie in with your retirement goals. So it's about working, when is your mortgage going to be cleared, and can you overpay it, or do you need to overpay it really? So a little motivator that I did in advance. So if your mortgage is 250,000 and your interest rate is 4.5%, and you've got a 35-year mortgage, if you just paid £50 a week off, which some people could manage to cut back on, you'd save yourself a whopping £78,000 in interest. That's just bonkers, isn't it? 50 quid a week, saving you 78,000 in interest. But here's the best bit. You will be extra smug for 9 years, 9 months, because you won't have a mortgage. You'll have paid it off nearly at 25 years rather than the 35 years. So imagine how it will feel to not have a mortgage for nearly a decade just from 50 quid a week. So these little things that you can do really, really add up. So I think, first of all, check it's sensible, your mortgage. And then you've got to weigh up the pros and cons. Like, can you change the tax bracket that you're in with your pension payment? So like the example we were saying earlier, if you're on 62, can you get to 60? If you're on 55, can you get into the basic rate tax threshold of just slightly over 50,000? And definitely if you're in that horrid 60% bracket of above 100, can you get yourself to 99,999? So I think it's about weighing up those two things.
That's really good advice.
Do you think that pensions are now a more important decision in financial planning than they were when the rates were lower? Like, is it more of a consideration?
Yeah.
Sorry, mortgages.
Mortgages. I think mortgages, you could outsave, you're used to be able to outsave your mortgage interest usually. So it was never such a big deal, but now it's huge. You can see just the fact that it's the interest that you're saving, £78,000 of interest from 50 quid a week.
And if you're forecasting at, say, 1% and the mortgage is at 4.5, then like where you're forecasting at 4, your calculations, they are comparable.
Yeah.
I guess when people are like, oh, I'll get 10% in the market, it always leans them towards investing over paying the mortgage.
But ideally, I mean, do both, but you choose which way you tilt towards. If you're an aggressive investor and you're happy with the highs and lows of the stock market, then go with that, because you probably will outperform your mortgage. Hopefully you're doing it tax efficiently, because you don't want it all to go in tax. But yeah, I think do both, but you decide which tilt you have.
Yeah, and there's something to be said about the peace of mind of being debt mortgage free, and that freeing.
Yeah, and if you're a cash hoarder, like we spoke about earlier, those people who were worried, deciding to have less amount of cash but in your mortgage can tick a big box, because probably now we're not going to be getting mortgage beating interest rates after tax for very much longer. So having money in your mortgage is actually probably saving you more than you're making in
if you're not a big investor, you're more of like someone sat on cash, you could fire it in. Yeah, because the rates are very similar, aren't they? Would you? I mean, is there a flexibility argument though of going, well, you could have the money in, say, like a cash savings account, and then when it comes to the refinance period, you can decide then if you overpay?
Yeah, you can do that. That's definitely helpful and gives you ultimate flexibility. But I think it depends what game you're playing with yourself. If you're just trying to up your mortgage by an amount that you're hopefully not going to miss, then just tweaking it a little will hopefully out of sight, out of mind, and you'll never even notice it.
It's like the pension thing again, isn't it? It's like the locking it away is potentially.
Because I think we can have great intentions, but if you're not really going to save that money for the day your mortgage rate's up.
If you're like in your 30s and you're starting out all your like pensions and mortgages, do you think you should focus on like, let's get a good pension going first, contribute to that, and then look for property? Or do you think you can do them at the same time?
Oh, it's so hard. It's a real personal thing, isn't it? I think naturally people do property first because it's built into us as English people.
Exactly.
Isn't it?
Do you think that's the right way to go about it for your security, your future?
I would just have to know the numbers. Like, should you really, really stretch yourself at the expense of your pension? No, because are you going to get that massive house with that massive mortgage, but you can't afford to pay into a pension? Then no. But I think if you're making a sensible decision,
where you live as well, right? So if you're in the centre of London and it's going to take you 15 years to save a deposit, you probably think, well, I should probably be paying into my pension because it's a lot of compounding. Whereas up north, it might take 3 years to get the deposit together. So okay, like prioritise the property. But yeah, I think, you know, for many people in the centre of London, it's going to take them most of their working lives to build up a meaningful deposit to get the house they want.
Yeah.
They're just going to end up in a flat, aren't they? And then they can't have a family and stuff. So yeah, it's very circumstantial. Yeah, I'm always going to say that everyone should at the very least be maxing out the contribution that their employer will do with their work-based scheme.
Without a doubt. Yeah. That's got to be your priority. Get as much free money from your employer as you can.
Yeah, and then go, okay, well, is it extra pension now or is it property? Another thing that, you know, I know that you do as part of your job is talk to people about protection and insurances. Whenever we mention insurance, people are like, it's a scam. You're not trying to sell anyone here. We've all got insurance. I don't know if Timay knows that today. But, you know.
I've got health insurance. We did an episode on insurance and a lot of my friends are like, oh my God, I never thought about income protection insurance. It's a really good idea. I think a lot of people like...
That could be the New Year's wish list then.
Yeah.
I mean, how important do you think this is for people?
So if you don't have kids, you've got very little mortgage, then you don't need life cover. If you've got loads of responsibilities and you've got kids and a massive mortgage, you're the main breadwinner, then it's really important. So I really do get stressed about the amount of money that it costs me on a monthly basis to have insurance at the right levels, but there's nothing more freaky outerish than not being insured correctly. So I think for me, I've got life cover, income protection and some critical illness cover. I couldn't afford critical illness cover for all my mortgage. So I had half for me, half for my husband, and that was a way to keep the costs down. But some stats, so I'm in my early mid-40s and Royal London, as I alluded to earlier, told me that I have a 39% chance of either dying, getting critically ill, or having 2 months off work before I was 65. And I've really freaked myself out about that. 39%.
I think the 2 months is the one that drives that up, right?
Yeah, 2 months. I mean,
I think the 2 months off work is the big one.
12% of a critical illness, 2% of dying, and 29% of not being able to work for 2 months or more. So you've got... and with all of these things, like when I first got insurance in my 20s, I mean, admittedly, I was in the industry, so I was an early starter in those things. But the earlier you get it, the cheaper it is. And I just started off with a little bit of income protection and a little bit of critical illness. And then in the definitions of these policies, every time you have a life event, which can be moving house, getting a promotion, having a kid, you can increase the cover based on the terms you got when you got it. You don't have to go through underwriting again. And as someone who looks after lots of people in their 40s and early 50s, it is so hard to get insurance, clean insurance, the older you get. Like I had a lady who hurt her ankle doing training for the London Marathon. So it's ankle and back problems that she had, and she'd had bouts of depression. We couldn't get her income protection.
Wow. Really?
And those things, you wouldn't necessarily think they're quite common things.
I think the depression cover, and that was the thing that surprised me, that you can be covered for depression and suicide.
Yeah.
As long as you don't kill yourself within 12 months. And I'm not saying that those are things that I always thought would just be, well, we don't cover that. Yeah. You know, like if you kill yourself, you don't get paid out. So
with income protection, you want to look at the small print and look at what it doesn't cover. So self-inflicted injury, failure to follow medical advice, all of those things, they can create reasons not to pay, but the really good contracts are going to say, we will pay you due to do your particular job due to any illness or injury. You just want it clean. And I mean, I do some insurance, but you really want to go to an insurance broker who does it day in, day out and knows those contracts inside out.
Yeah, and I guess it's we say this a lot, it's the product that you hope you never use, and then at the end of your life you go, well, that was a big waste of time. But that's the whole point, whereas the 2 in 100 people, it wasn't. And I think the key point is there's different covers that offer different things. Worst case, you die, but the income protection thing of 2 months, so if you're out of work for 2 months or longer, it kicks in and basically pays your bills. Is that right?
Yeah, so I did a quote where if I want to have £32,500 a year of income paid to me tax-free, which is the maximum you can get if you're earning 50,000 a year. At my age, if I'm sick for more than 13 weeks, to cover me all the way till 65, so that's £73 a month. So my maths is a bit rubbish, but let's say that's £1,000 a year rounding up. I'm paying that for the next 20 years. I'm paying £20,000 during my working life to put a safety net under me of £32,500 a year.
Yeah, and I think
that's it.
It seems like a good trade-off, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't want to be the insurer on the other side of that bet.
No. And, people listening at this time of year are only just getting started, and that's the exact kind of time that you need a protection because you don't have the assets behind you. And what we know about savings is that most people are 1 month away from bankruptcy, essentially, because they've got nothing. So whilst 2 months off work might sound nice, it's not going to be furlough. Yeah. It's going to be no income, and then it goes, if I gave you no money for 2 months, what would happen? And most people slip into this position of debt. But
the beauty is you can use it to motivate you, because when you're financially self-sufficient, when your cushion is big enough to be able to just grow to create the income that you need, you can stop these policies, you can reduce them, you can halve them. You don't have to keep them all the way to the end.
So in a way, when you're in your 20s, you've got no responsibilities. Maybe you don't need it apart from, say, some income protection. When you're in your 50s or plus and you've done a lot of saving, then you can be like, I don't need them anymore.
Yeah, and cancel them.
We talk about cover there, though, but don't employers offer some benefits that people need to check?
Yeah, so you want to look at what life cover if you've got at work. A real common amount is sort of 2 to 3 times. 4 times used to be really common. So 2, 3, 4 is probably the right multiple of your salary. The next one is how long will they pay you if you're sick? If you're in a small company, probably only going to get statutory sick pay. So that's where you really need to look at an income protection. But if you work for a big company, you're probably going to get 75% of your salary all the way until you retire, let's say. I saw one all the way till 75 a few weeks back. And if you work, say, for like the NHS, it'll be for every year you work there, you get 1 month's full pay, 1 month's half pay. If you're there for 3 years, 3 months half pay, full pay, 3 months half, so on and so on.
In terms of sick pay?
Yeah.
Wow.
I think it caps at 6 months full, 6 months half is another common way of working out what sick pay you've got at work. But yeah, knowing what you've got at work, because then either maybe you don't need any more cover, or in that 6 months full pay, 6 months half pay, you can get your insurance to have a split, what's called a split deferred period, so that it matches perfectly the sick pay you've got at work, so you're never double covered and paying for it twice.
I think we always talk about it and people will always say it's a scam, and I think it's just that point of like car insurance. You hope you never use it, but you probably kind of should have it. Yeah, so pensions is a big one, and the way we can do that is we can go, can I increase by 1%, or is there a match that I'm not taking advantage of through my HR work department? Then we can look at the default funds and maybe getting out of a default fund. So if you've not got more money, you go, okay, how can I get a better return?
Can I give a little tip in that one? So the pension gap has widened, the gender pension gap has widened since 2021. And I think that's because a lot of women are exposed to bonds more than men. And so women's pensions have done worse than men over that same time frame. So I can't think of another reason why. So really looking at the default fund is so important.
You think more men are more proactive in getting out of the default funds?
I think they probably wouldn't have been as cautious with their pension funds.
Okay, yeah. So I think that's, the one thing this year, I think that's the thing.
Huge.
That if you can get out of the default and pick a fund that's more suited to your risk profile, I mean, it's better to be in the default than not. But if you're listening to finance podcasts,
if the default's good, stay in it. But if it's not, it could be a very important decision you make.
Yeah, and then looking at your spending and budgeting and setting up habits that kind of promote you to save and work with your personality traits rather than against them. And then, you know, mortgage overpayments and things like this.
Switching your bank account.
Switching your bank account. Yeah, we've got a little hit list here.
Sort out your insurance.
Yeah,
Maybe you just do one a month. Like, you don't have to do it all in this month, do you? Maybe you just do one of these jobs each month throughout the year.
Yeah, and then you fast forward 12 months and you're like,
you're sorted.
Yeah. You got anything, T? What's the tea tip of the year?
Tea tip of the year, buy the dip. No.
Just the tip, buy the dip.
To buy the dip, that's it. Buy whenever the market goes down, buy the dip.
Oh, don't do that. That's horrible advice.
No, tip of the year. Get serious. Realize that we're all, this coming from me. If I'm telling you to get serious, then you need to get serious. We're all getting older. You got to like, I'm a very big ostrich, head in the sand kind of. That's what my mum says.
You're just speaking t-shirt slogans, mate. Everything you're saying is just like...
No, my mum's always like, you're like an ostrich. You put your head in the sand. You're like, oh, nothing's going to go wrong. No one can see me. I've got my head in the sand. But you need to actually like be proactive sometimes and take charge. And there's no time to take charge like January, right?
Yeah.
Start of the year, make some changes. And then by the end of the year, be like, oh, wow, I'm glad I did that. That's what I did last year. And it's served me well every year since we started this podcast.
That's what I did last year, and it served me well every year. That whole 1 year.
3 years.
Okay.
See, year number 3 now.
Are we? No, we're not.
Yeah, we are.
Are we?
We didn't start last January, did we?
No.
Yeah, 2 years. Come on, guys.
2 years.
Yeah, this is year number 3.
But you started last year, and it served you well all for the 3 of those years. On that note, that's T's tip of the year. Tune in next week for more golden wisdom. Here's the benchmark, guys.
Such a knob.
If you actually feel like you benefit from speaking to a financial advisor like Lisa, we offer that service now, and we've left all the details in the description below. You meant to come in with something funny too.
Was I?
Yeah. Sort your line.